Everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. We're going to cover everything. We're going to cut through all the propaganda, give it to you straight from left, right, and center. The opinions are what counts. Happy Sunday to all you great patriots out there. Mark Schaftlein with you. Really happy you can join us on this weekend. Boy, what a crazy week last week was. We talked a little bit about it on Saturday's show, but Richard, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. There hasn't been too much happening since the last time you were on the show. Just kidding. Oh, it's unbelievable what's happening. But Richard, welcome back. Let me start with this. Give me your take on the events of last week. And then, we'll get into all the polling and why it happened and the policies and the lies of the Biden administration. But, take a few minutes and for our viewers and listeners, what did you think from the last time we spoke? Because so many things have taken place.
Well, it's been first. Thank you for having me back, Mark. And it's been a few weeks since we spoke, and my gosh, we could speak for hours about the last few weeks. But this last week has been so incredible, with the president stepping down, his speech on Thursday night, and not only the events that happened, but the things around them. Some of the details have been very interesting, unique, and perplexing, such as his letter that he was not going to run on personal stationery versus presidential stationery, just sending a letter out on social media versus having a prime time or a presentation when he made that announcement. The uniqueness of his speech on Thursday, which made more questions instead of answered questions. Kamala Harris jumping into the campaign fray right away, and some of the things that are going on around that to make her the presumptive nominee when I believe she's in a tryout mode right now, and they're still subject to change depending on what happens. So there's just a lot going on, and the question is it an orchestrated plan, or are they making moves every day based on what happens, similar to the Wag the Dog movie?
I'm traditionally not a conspiracy theory guy, and I've been fairly consistent, as have you, that Joe Biden was not fit to lead this country. We've talked about that extensively since that disastrous debate performance. The fact he got out of the race was no shock, but how he got out of the race. You mentioned, let's go
Yes.
back to last Sunday when word actually broke. The day before, he was fighting hook, line, and sinker to stay in this race. I mean, he had his surrogates out on the Sunday talk shows. He had Hunter. He had Jill. I mean, they did a campaign rally in Vegas, before, he stepped aside. But going back again, if we think about it, I'm not going to put this one past the point of that there could have been this whole thing planned out. Why in the world did the Democratic Party put him out there for a June debate? And he clearly was not ready for it. It was an absolute disaster. And the question you have to ask yourself on that was it planned? Okay, well, let's say, for example, it was planned. Well, if it was planned, they executed the script to a T. Because then he goes out, he does Stephanopoulos, no improvement. Does Lester Holt, goes backwards. Pre-scripted comments to two black radio hosts, one of which got fired. No good. Goes out to Vegas on, campaign swing. Not good. Gets COVID. Not good. Comes back. I mean, before he resigned, I remember watching that video of him when he was deboarding, the plane landing back in D.C. He just sort of stood there, and he looked terrible. Now, look, people get sick. I've had COVID. I know what it was like, but man, he just looked awful. And at the same time, you've got that picture of Trump with his fist up and the flag. And again, Richard, Biden's polling numbers were cratering. Everybody could see it. And he was trying to be forced out by Barack Obama, by Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. The donor class had started to dry up. But for all that being said, how it actually came about on that Sunday is the question that I was hoping would get cleared up at his press release. The presentation, I shouldn't call it a press release, his teleprompter read from the Oval Office the other day. I think, Richard, that left more questions than answered. I mean, I said this on yesterday's show. Boy, he looked terrible staring into that teleprompter. And everybody's, oh, Mark, come on, you can't criticize him. Now they're admitting what everybody talked about earlier. Oh, he's an elderly man, and you shouldn't be criticizing him. He stepped aside. And the gall of all these fawning media that are lying and gaslighting the American people, Richard, saying Joe Biden did this for the country. He stepped aside for the good of the party. Well, he admitted he stepped aside for the good of the party. I'll give him that. But to try to spin this and say Joe Biden's some great historical figure and he sacrificed personal ambition, gave up the presidency for the good of the country, that's just a bold-faced lie. And that's a spin and a gaslight because he literally went out kicking and screaming. Damn good and well in his mind, Richard, he still thought he could beat Trump when in actuality his polling numbers were cratering. So, what do you think based upon my monologue there? I mean, am I on script, off script, on base, off base?
Well, I think you are, and my basis of all my comments are that the Democrats will do anything to win. They'll
Yep.
violate any rule, they'll change any law, they'll set any precedent to win the election. That's all that matters to them. And so I believe they've had a plan for a long time. I believe the early debate was part of it. But I think Biden pushed back against some of that because, in my opinion, the ideal time for him to have dropped out would have been on Thursday of the Republican convention, because that would have taken all of the news of Donald Trump's nomination and his nomination speech off of the media and put Joe Biden onto the media. So when it didn't happen on Thursday, that's when I believe that the plan was not being implemented by one side because he was pushing back and negotiating what it would take for him to step aside. And of course, I believe his primetime speech on Thursday night was much more of a campaign speech. I think that both parties were in there. He endorsed Kamala. He set some campaign items. He believes he's going to stay in until Election Day and Inauguration Day, which is a separate issue. I think that the people planning him leaving, all they wanted to do was be able to give him a few crumbs to think he looks good, but they wanted to move on to him. Now, I do not believe he will make it to Election Day, much less Inauguration Day, but that is a card to be played later at the Democrat Party. I believe he'll be gone, and they will have Kamala in the White House be running as an incumbent before Election Day.
You might be right about that. And I think a lot of it's going to depend upon something we'll talk about in a few minutes. But a lot of it's going to depend on her polling numbers. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, I still have a lot of concerns about what actually happened. I mean, when he was reading that teleprompter Thursday night, again, to me, it looked weak, it looked feeble. And people that criticized, I think Scott Jennings over on CNN, who had echoed similar comments, but it seems like, well, if you criticize Joe Biden, here's this great American stepping aside from his ambitions for the good of the country, when literally the night before, or not the night before, a couple nights before on Saturday night, he was kicking and screaming. He thought he was feeling he was getting knifed in the back by Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer, et al. Pelosi in particular. Yeah, really ticked at her. And then all of a sudden, he goes from this embattled, feeble, just horrific performance in that debate and horrific performance afterward. And it finally, I guess, my gut feeling, Richard, tells me the polling numbers were falling so fast and were so bad that he finally realized, well, if I'm going to lose, I don't want to be recognized as the guy that lost to Trump. I don't want to end my 50-year career losing to Trump. And yet you and I and many other guests that have come on these shows, we've said for a while, he is not going to be the nominee. You were really specific about it. I mean, you had said, God, I don't know, 6 months ago, he will not be the nominee. And
Mhm.
ultimately, you were proven correct.
Well, I think it's interesting, and that's why I go back to the wag the dog example, because it's like it's a major TV production every day. And I believe we're seeing it now. As you said, they went from him fighting to him bailing out. Kamala Harris is getting the makeover now from the media. They're acting like she's the best thing since sliced bread. There's efforts to erase historical facts from the media. Axios, who said that she was a border czar in 21, is now taking that information off the internet. So they're acting like it never happened. You see Chuck Schumer on Wednesday, I believe it was, coming in and doing a press conference, and he must have been doing it only to a few media people because he tried to be so excited, saying it was a ground up swell for Kamala Harris and we're going to back her. And then he claps, and he's the only one clapping because
I
there's
saw that.
no citizens there. It's only media people who aren't going to clap, and they're trying to cover up their love for Kamala Harris and the left side. And so that's what's interesting. We're getting a manufactured story, and that's part of the reason why I think this happened now. They've got to, before August 7th, secure a nomination for somebody to get on the Ohio ballot unless they get those rules changed before their convention. And that's why I believe they're going to see what the polls are between now and August 7th. If the polls rise, then I think Kamala Harris could be the one. If they stay the same or if she sinks, then I think they could throw her over the side before that date as well and try to find someone who could get excitement in the public.
On that note, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to get into two subjects. We're going to talk about polling, and we're going to talk about what Richard just referenced. Will Joe Biden serve out his term? We'll be back in 90 seconds.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, my name is General Mike Flynn, and I'm here to talk about a limited time offer of subscriptions to Patriot.tv and how you can become a member of our Patriot Defenders subscription club and become a member of Patriot.tv. Really, it's America's network. I call it the home of truth. And you can do that for only $9.99 a month. It's a great deal by itself, but what I'm going to walk you through here in these next few seconds is a couple of package deals that we have that are unbelievable. The next membership was the annual membership at $99 that you can save right away. You save $20 if you come in at the annual subscription rate. The best deal that I think that people ought to seriously consider is the 2-year membership at $159. And it includes a special edition of my recently released documentary, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. So along with the 2-year membership, the 2-year subscription will send you a DVD combo of the film, plus an option to stream the movie online, as well as exclusive interviews of Tucker Carlson, Devin Nunes, and myself. So go to the home of truth, right? Go to Patriot.tv today, sign up, seriously consider the 2-year subscription rate. It's an unbelievable savings. I think it's a total savings of about $70 from just signing up on a monthly or a annual basis. So thank you very much for your support. Patriot.tv is America's new network. Thank you.
And we're back. And General Flynn, thank you for that endorsement. Folks, go up, click Patriot Defenders, become a member. We have great content that you can look at, and we'd love to have you be a Patriot Defender and do everything you can to help Patriot TV, one of the fastest growing networks in America. All right, Richard, you threw out an idea, and a lot of people, not just Republicans, are talking about it. Will Joe Biden finish his term? He's digging in, saying, yeah, I'm going to finish my term. He's getting very little resistance from Democrats. And it's reminiscent to me of, to a degree, his desire to stay in the presidential race. Now, I think the reality is, um, if that speech on the teleprompter from the Oval Office the other night is any indication, coupled with his incredibly poor performance the 3 weeks prior, and it doesn't give me great confidence that this man can finish it. Politically, I think the Republican's better off if he stays there. At least it's a reminder that he's a Democrat. And I think you were on to something. I mean, one of two things is going to happen on the polling numbers, and we'll talk about it after we go through this analysis. But if her polling numbers start to strengthen, I think that she'll be the nominee. They are
Yes.
talking about moving up before the convention a virtual nominating process. And I remember Donna Brazile talked about this. She's one of the DNC bigwigs, that they were going to do this for Biden. Remember when Biden wanted to stay in the race and they said, well, the rules dictate this. He's got all the delegates and, we'll just have a virtual and Biden will be the nominee. Well, that fell apart pretty fast when he decided to quit the campaign last Sunday. But apparently they're going to take those same rules and apply them to Kamala Harris so that she becomes the not the de facto nominee, she becomes the actual nominee before the Democratic convention. So, Richard, my hypothetical here is okay, they're doing that for a reason. And I think that they're going to do everything they can to keep Biden in office. They want to keep her on the campaign trail. They don't want they want as few as possible of his disastrous policies to stick to her. Because if he was incapacitated and they had to either invoke the 25th Amendment or he voluntarily stepped aside, which I can't imagine, now all of a sudden people are going to get reminded, hey, President Harris is a lot like President Biden. Richard, is that a theory that you espouse?
Well, I think that one, we'll see with the polls, and you're right. If the polls are good, it's going to cement her. I believe they have to have a nominee by August 7th to get on the ballot in Ohio without depending on Ohio changing their rules. And of course, there's a Republican governor and legislature in Ohio, so that makes that a little bit more risky. So I think they'd like to have it solidified by then, which also gives them other benefits as far as showing that they know what they're doing versus having all these questions come up. But as far as Biden fulfilling the term, I don't think we'll see him very much. He acted like in the speech he was going to be out on the campaign trail and doing all these things. Well, he hadn't been doing that before. Why would he be doing it afterwards? And so I think they're going to want to try to run him from a basement or wherever and come out with executive orders and things that they're saying that he's doing without us ever seeing that. Now, I believe the incumbency has a double-edged sword. There's an advantage if she runs as an incumbent, showing her to be president already, but there's also the risk of tying her to Biden's policies, which a lot of people are not going to like as well. And so they're going to have to figure out, and I think they're going to read the tea leaves in the polls to figure out whether they pull the plug on him and put her in, or whether they can get by with the public with him being in office, but nobody ever seeing him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that because he had limited visibility prior. I mean, you'd see him every now and then, but during the course of his administration, what did he give? 4 addresses from the Oval Office, including the one where he quit. He really never didn't even go to Capitol Hill since 2021. We would see him at the G7. You were in Normandy when he was there. We saw him personally. We talked about that on a previous show. He was various foreign trips, but my gut feeling tells me I don't think we're going to see a lot of him because there's not going to be major legislation other than spending bills that are going to pass. Congress is going to be out campaigning. I mean, I think we're going to have a de facto non-president. I mean, my concern is, what if something big happens that requires presidential attention? Who's actually, and this is a question you and I have talked about, who's actually really in charge in that White House? I mean, clearly a man that can't even read a teleprompter. That's a problem. And yet, Hugh, just like normal, everybody in the mainstream media, why, how can you insult Joe Biden? I mean, he's sacrificing his personal ambition for the good of the country. And you knew
Well,
damn good and well that wasn't the case. So
well, exactly. And I think when you ask the question, who's running things in the White House, I think things are being run outside the White House and communicated to aides inside the White House who are really taking care of the details. And the question is, who is running it outside the White House? And of course, we think President Obama is probably the one, but we don't know for sure because he's done an excellent job keeping his fingerprints off of everything.
as he always does. Look,
Yeah,
Joe
that's
Biden
the
was no
Alinsky
happy
way.
camper. Yeah, exactly right. All right, let's shift a little direction from the past, Joe Biden, to the future, Kamala Harris. And Richard, let's talk a little bit about these polling numbers that have come out. You know, there was only one poll that showed her ahead, and I think that poll was an outlier. Donald Trump has consistently, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, he has been in that 48, 49, 50% range with Joe Biden and with Kamala Harris. He is not losing any support at all. Now, she has picked up a little bit of Joe Biden's support, meaning she's not cratering like Joe Biden was. In other words, Joe Biden was cratering in the polls. We were heading towards a colossal landslide election, the likes of Reagan-Mondale in 1984, where Reagan won 49 states. Now, in the current makeup of the country, that wasn't going to happen, but we were staring at a solid minimum 330 electoral votes and possibly a win in the popular vote. And Richard, my point was this. In one poll, the CNN, let's take a couple polls as an example. The CNN poll that came out late last week, 49% Donald Trump, 46% Kamala Harris. The Quinnipiac poll, Donald Trump 49, Kamala Harris 47, 2-point edge. And then on Thursday, Rasmussen, a well respected pollster, called the previous couple elections within a point, less than a point. Trump 50, Harris 43. The last time Rasmussen polled, it was 50-42. So Harris picked up 1 point there. So my point is this: 48, 49, 50. Let's be generous and just call it Trump's in that 48 to 49 percentile range. Richard, if that holds, Donald Trump will be the 47th president because he does not need to get to 50% to win this election. I think 48, 48 and a half, he wins this election comfortably. Why do I say that? Jill Stein's going to pick up a point, Cornel West a point, Kennedy, I mean, he slipped a little bit in the polls, but he's going to get 3 or 4 points. Of course, some people say he pulls equally from Trump. But if you make the assumption Cornel West and Jill Stein are going to pull a point each, and I think they will, well, now you're looking at 48 Trump, 48 and a half Trump, 48 Harris, with the fact that she's going to roll up a big margin in California, which is expected, and maybe New York. That translates to me into a solid electoral college win for President Trump. And again, he doesn't have to win the popular vote, but if they're at roughly the same number, 48-48, then Donald Trump's going to be president. If Trump hits 49%, it's going to be a landslide, meaning he will win all the blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. He's already way ahead in Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina. He could win New Hampshire, Virginia. I mean, it could be pretty aggressive if he hits that 49%. So Richard, I think the Democratic Party is going to follow these polls closely and see, because we've already seen the media fawning, literally fawning over Kamala Harris. the likes of which I have not seen since 2008 when Barack Obama ran. So, what's your take on these polls, the media, the influence, and where in your mind does this race stand right now?
Well, I think everything you said is spot on, and I think announcing Kamala when they did was trying to blunt the Republican convention and the bump that Trump got from the assassination attempt. So they're trying to stem that. The base was leaving the Democrats not only from a voting standpoint, but they were losing dollars and they were losing volunteers as well. So they're trying to re-enthuse the base right now first and solidify them. And I think Kamala Harris or another Democrat may be able to do that, whereas Biden couldn't. But it's those undecideds and independents that unless Trump steps on his toe, if you'll pardon the expression, I think he has them because if you look at her positions and don't look just at personalities, if you don't look at her position she's had in office, but if you look at her accomplishments or lack thereof and beliefs and compare that. And that's why I think President Trump has to expose those things like defunding the police, open borders, abortion up to the moment of birth and beyond. Her views are more radical than Bernie Sanders, and the middle of the road people, even if they're not Republican, are not going to vote for her viewpoints. And so we need to make sure everyone knows that, not just this cult of personality to kind of describe what you were saying since Obama.
Yeah, no question about it, Richard. All right, we're going to take our middle of show break here, but when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit further into these numbers, give you the real story behind them, and talk about ways either Trump or Harris could expand from where they are right now. We'll be back shortly.
Sounds rolling. All three cameras. We're good.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Really brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn, one of America's most treasured military heroes. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Go to Patriot TV, click on Store, and grab a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own a treasured piece of American history. And get your own personal download link to watch America's most talked-about movie, as well as a DVD hand-signed by General Michael Flynn. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store. Incredible savings and a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
And I'm back with Richard Battle on Schaftlein Report. Okay, Richard, you talked about independent voters. And I've got some statistics. I don't know if I believe these, but Rasmussen's pretty accurate on them. Independent voters right now in his poll are breaking for President Trump 53-33. That's a 20-point spread. So I like to say this a lot. You know, the media is almost all Democrats, other than a handful of outlets. The wild, glowing enthusiasm for Kamala Harris, it's just over the top. So I'm sitting here saying, okay, all these Democrats make up about a quarter of the electorate. Republicans make up about a quarter of the electorate, but independents are going to decide this race. They're half the electorate. So, Richard, I'm saying most elections are won based upon how the perception is the candidate will handle the economy. Now, we have interesting set of news this past week. The economy expanded 2.8% in Q2. Household spending was up 3%. Government spending up 3.1. Business spending up almost 4%. Okay, and I think that consumer number was a little bit lower through. It was like 2.627. But collectively, between consumers, business, government, you got a pretty solid 2.8% growth rate. But Richard, despite that, Trump was beating Biden by 20 points on the economy. I'm guessing he'll be at least in that same range on Kamala Harris because her policies are the same as Joe Biden's. You know, limit fracking in Pennsylvania. That's a real big winner. Student loan forgiveness. I mean, capping energy. I mean, Richard, her policies are the same as him. And she was, as you mentioned, ranked right next to Bernie Sanders when she was in the Senate. So, how in the world does this turn around from a Democratic perspective on the issues? Forget the personality, just on the issues that independents care so much about.
Well, and I'm a believer that the independents are more former Republican than former Democrat over time. I think that's changed over the past few years because I think there are more Republicans who've been frustrated with the lack of action from the Republican Party and become independent. The Democrats usually stick with the Democrats as long as they feel like they've got a Democrat candidate, and so there's less of them that become Republican. And as we've talked about before, I really think this election is not Democrat versus Republican, but American versus globalist. And so you have nearly all the Democrats are globalists, and you have a fair number of Republicans, unfortunately, that are globalist as well. And so when the policies are American, I think you're going to get many Republican votes and you're going to get a lot of these independents because I think more of them are American than globalist. So the Democrats, to me, it seems like they're running on the right to choose. They're running, Kamala Harris believes in universal health care, trying to give each of these small groups crumbs and gifts. But I think people are starting to see through that so that the base voters they'll capture, but they're not going to get as many of the non-base voters with those packages as they have in the past.
You know what I don't understand about her first couple days out on the campaign trail this week? I mean, again, far be it to me to give a Democrat recommendations, but with the economy growing at 2.8%, and I know it's an uneven economy. A lot of people are having to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs to keep up. Credit card debt's over $1 trillion. The average price of a house in this country is now $424,000. And my God, for young people to be able to afford that between the principal, interest, taxes, insurance, it's a tough nut to swallow for them. I don't know why they don't talk about that more. Instead, they come out of the gate with her, and what does she talk about? Abortion, of course, but she doesn't. She just basically lies about Trump's position. Trump has been crystal clear after Roe v. Wade. It should be a state issue. He's not for any type of legislation related to it. He believes it's a state issue. Then they throw out that crap about Project 25, which is some, interesting way to look at things, but that's from the Heritage Foundation, which is way more conservative than Trump is. He doesn't espouse those positions, so they lie about that. And I think when you start a campaign and you're behind, which they are, and they start lying about Trump's position, one thing about Trump is he is fairly consistent in what his beliefs are, Richard. So I can't figure out why they're doing this, but they are behind, and I think they're going to throw everything but the kitchen sink, including that, at Trump. Look, they tried lawfare. That didn't work. They tried suing him. That didn't really work. They tried to criminalize him. That hasn't really worked. An assassin tried to kill him. That didn't work. So, I mean, he's still sitting there right now in a pretty good position. And yet the Democrats, arguably, one of the issues they should be talking about is the economy. I mean, the stock market's near record highs. It's been wild swings lately, but they seem to want to, I don't know. I mean, I'm not following the campaign in the first few days coming out of the gate. Richard, what is their strategy? What are they going to run on that is going to excite independents? They can excite their 25% Democratic base. They can get all the African American women in the world to support them, probably 98%. But that in itself won't win you an election. You have to get independent voters.
Well, and I think everything you said was true. One thing I would add to that that mystifies me is Kamala Harris went on Wednesday and spoke to a sorority convention in Indiana and wasn't there for the joint session of Congress with Benjamin Netanyahu in the Capitol. And historically, the Jewish vote has been overwhelmingly Democrat. But the more we see the Democrats, and we saw Rashida Tlaib with a war criminal card during the presentation, we see them as the Hamas wing of politics in the U.S. They didn't do anything yesterday or Thursday or Wednesday when the protesters showed up in Washington and tore down the American flags and defaced the monuments, beheaded George Washington's monument. They trashed that area and had to be cleaned up on Thursday. And so there was nothing from the Democrats about that. So to me, are they giving up the Jewish vote that they've had in the past as well? Do they think the pro-Muslim vote is larger than the Jewish vote? So to me, that was a great misstep as well in the campaign. So I'm not sure they have a strategy as much as they're reacting to all of these different events going on. And when you have so many different small segments of your voting group, you're always going to be pitting one against another. How do you keep them all together? I think that's the toughest thing they have going for them right now.
Yeah, I was not surprised by how the Democrats reacted when Netanyahu gave his speech, which, by the way, I mentioned this yesterday. I thought it was an exceptionally good speech. I liked how
Yes.
he just talked down to the protesters. I mean, someone logically looking at this would say, wait a minute, Israel lost 1,200 people. And he did in his speech talk about proportionally what that would be if his population relative to his size versus the United States. And again, I'm not going to paint all Democrats with the same brush. Schumer was there. There was a majority of Democrats were there, but
Yes.
about 1/3 of their caucus was not there. You know, the squad, the AOCs, and you know what? You and I know why she didn't show up at that event. She did not want to offend the Hamas wing of the Democratic Party, particularly in Michigan. Okay, I get it. Okay, can you give her a pass and say, well, it was a pre-scheduled event? Not really. I mean, you know, people
No.
knew that he was coming for, over a month. Okay, and for her to give a speech at a sorority in Indiana, what's the chance, Richard, that Kamala Harris is going to win the state of Indiana? Zero.
Zero.
So I mean, to me, it. Look, I will give the Harris campaign one piece of credit. On Thursday, they came out and strongly denounced the Hamas agitators for desecrating statues, whacking Washington's head, burning American flags. You know, they did come out and do that. I'll give them a little bit of credit for that. But here again, this is the Hamas wing of the Democratic Party. Why were so many Democrats so eager not to be seen with Netanyahu? I mean, to me, you're turning your back on the key ally that the U.S. for generations has partnered with in the Middle East. And again, I thought Netanyahu gave an exceptionally good speech. He was articulate. It's his fourth address to a joint session of Congress. And then what happens? Okay, we saw that. And then on Thursday, when Netanyahu was meeting with President Biden, Vice President Harris in the White House, massive amount of protesters gather outside the White House. So whether it's Congress, the White House, you know, Netanyahu said in his speech this was being funded by Iran. I wouldn't doubt it. But I'm sitting here thinking, how did we come to this? How did we get to a point where these young kids whose head is full of mush come out there and literally take down American flags, burn them, put up Palestinian flags, desecrate monuments, statues. I mean, to anyone, Richard, this just looks insane. I mean, I'm sitting here going, how did it come to this radicalization that's taken place? And to me, I'm still not. I haven't talked myself into a good answer on it yet.
Well, I think there's two pieces of it. One, we've got the American kids, adults now who've not been given an education about the different positions and different players from a historical standpoint. And so they're prone to respond to the moment. And if they believe there's genocide on Hamas, then they're going to stand up against that because they don't have any long-term perspective. But don't overlook the fact that we've imported these people over several years, especially beginning with President Obama. Took 70,000 people and put in Minnesota from Somalia in one area. And then in Michigan, they've put a lot of people as well. And so if we keep importing that particular group, at some point they're going to be larger and louder than the Jewish group, because the history of countries around the world is, as Muslim populations grow, they evolve from accepting where they are to going up and wanting to install Sharia law. And that's something that we're seeing in Europe now. And we're going to see it more in this country if we continue to import those people and do not educate our historic citizens in the differences.
Richard, on that note, we're going to take our final break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about key things, factors underlying these poll numbers, and really what is going to drive the election from here, and how we're going to give a little prognostication about where we think these polls may go. Stick with us. A lot of good information coming up on the other side of the break.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold.
Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, my name is General Mike Flynn, and I'm here to talk about a limited time offer of subscriptions to Patriot.tv and how you can become a member of our Patriot Defenders subscription club and become a member of Patriot.tv. Really, it's America's network. I call it the home of truth. And you can do that for only $9.99 a month. It's a great deal by itself, but what I'm going to walk you through here in these next few seconds is a couple of package deals that we have that are unbelievable. The next membership was the annual membership at $99 that you can save. Right away, you save $20 if you come in at the annual subscription rate. The best deal that I think that people ought to seriously consider is the 2-year membership at $159. And it includes a special edition of my recently released documentary, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. So along with the 2-year membership, the 2-year subscription will send you a DVD combo of the film, plus an option to stream the movie online, as well as exclusive interviews of Tucker Carlson, Devin Nunes, and myself. So go to the home of truth, right? Go to Patriot.tv today, sign up, seriously consider the 2-year subscription rate. It's an unbelievable savings. I think it's a total savings of about $70 from just signing up on a monthly or a annual basis. So thank you very much for your support. Patriot.tv is America's new network. Thank you.
And I'm back with Richard Battle. All right, Richard, we got basically a few final segment here. The betting odds right now are showing Donald Trump with a 60 to 64% chance to win the election, almost 2/3. But Kamala Harris is still in there, 35 to 40% chance. her numbers are better than Joe Biden's. So I think it's fair to say that, again, we can go through the machinations about how this happened and whatever theory we have. But the fact of the matter is, folks, the bleeding, the absolute hemorrhaging that was happening under Joe Biden has stopped. Okay, now has it stopped at a level sufficient enough for Trump to win? If the election were held today, Donald Trump would be the 47th president. But it's not today. So they've got their convention coming up. They're going to nominate Vice President Harris before, like a virtual roll call vote. So when they go to Chicago, she will be the nominee. But Richard, something tells me, given the events over the past, let's just call it 3.5 weeks, from the disastrous debate performance, the poor interviews, the attempted assassination of Trump, the coalescing around Harris, Biden getting out of the race, that is enough news in a year versus a 30-day news cycle. I mean, we were having special reports on Patriot TV every weekend. So, with all that in place, Richard, the economy right now, the numbers came out, they're pretty good. So, I don't think the Democrats, well, I think they should talk those issues. I don't think they will. I think it's going to be, they're going to talk about their bread and butter issues, abortion, Trump is a threat to democracy. They'll throw January 6th in there periodically. But when you can't talk about your record, what else are they going to run on? They're clearly going to be identity politics. You correctly said earlier, they're shoring up their base. But we said that about the Democrats. Richard, what does Donald Trump have to do now? He's got a new opponent. He has to recalibrate. I mean, let's call it what it was. He was cruising to victory, and now all of a sudden he's got to step back, and now he has a different opponent with really a skill set 180 degrees different than Joe Biden. What does Trump do going forward, Richard?
Well, and another challenge is she's a minority woman. And so every time he says something, they're going to try to accuse him of being racist or misogynist. I really liked the first part of his nomination speech. It was much more positive, calmer. It invited everyone into the Republican Party to vote for him. He asked for the vote. And I think that kind of message is much more inviting to people who've not voted for him before. His base is solid as a rock. You can't separate them from him. So he's got them. But if he speaks in a way that alienates people who've not voted for him before, that could really hurt. And so I'm hoping he'll do that. And then the other thing I hope is, because the issues I believe are his to lose. And I think if he'll point out issue by issue what he did as president, what he wants to do versus what their record is, I believe he will attract those independents between those two things and not giving people a reason not to vote for him. He's got to make them enthusiastic so they want to show up for him on election day.
One of the things a lot of commentators said, which was correct prior to Joe Biden dropping out of the race, the Democrats were trying to make this election about Donald Trump. Threat to democracy, January 6th, horrible this, horrible that. They didn't talk about his policies, because how could you? Inflation was 1.5% when he was in office. We had solid economic growth, low employment. Obviously COVID messed a lot of that up in the last year, but most people fondly remember the Trump years. They didn't always like him personally, but they did like his policies. So I think their hope was to make the election about Trump. Obviously, when Biden had his debacle of a debate performance, everything then shifted to where this race is about Biden. Well, now 3.5 weeks later, he's out. Okay, as a lot of us predicted, you included. So now Trump's got this fresh face, and I think you're right. Yes, is the media wildly enthusiastic to her? We talked about earlier in the show. She's like Barack Obama now. That's the way the media is treating her. Trump, they're going to still pound him because they don't like him. Okay, but again, as we said, here's the key, folks. 25% of the electorate is Democrat. maybe 26, 25, 26 Republican, roughly 50% independent. And if he can focus on issues that are important to the independent voters, continue to come across presidential, talk about the policies, talk about her voting record as among the most liberal senators, rivaling or exceeding Bernie Sanders' voting record.
Yes.
She's going to come out and try to be Prosecutor Harris. She's going to talk about Trump and his legal issues. But you know what? I don't think, I mean, that sounds good to Democrats, but I don't necessarily think independents are going to buy that, which again is predominantly why Trump is in these polls right now. But the one thing, Richard, that could change is Democrats, and we'll call them left-leaning independents. They were not enthusiastic about coming out to Joe Biden. There were turnout models that said, he's a disaster. Now, maybe not so much, but we talked about what Trump can do. What does she have to do to try to cut into that Trump lead? And can she tighten this race up? Because right now, Richard, again, 72 polls, Trump was up by 2 point on average. Polling that has come out since it's just her and him, that averages 2 to 3 points. And some of them are outside the margin of error. So what does she have to do? Does she try to define Trump? Or does she, can she possibly run on Biden's record?
Well, I think she's going to do what's called in the sales game of using the FUD factor: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And we've seen that already, although it's not been effective yet, but they're trying to paint Trump as a dictator, a revenge tour. Once he comes into office, he'll never leave office. There'll never be another election. President Biden said in his speech Wednesday night, I think, the risk of democracy 6 or 7 times. They're just beating that over the head left and right. So to me, those attacks on President Trump will go alongside the ones where they want to give a woman the right to choose, for example. They'll appeal to their normal base voters with all the giveaways that they've done. But to me, it's going to be a negative campaign against Trump and trying to get people to make an election about Trump versus about the Democrats' policies these last 4 years, which Biden, Kamala Harris can look in the mirror and she can see Joe Biden. In effect, they're so close together. So, and she's actually even worse than he is on the issues.
Yeah, no, she she clearly is, and I think she's going to have a problem. She was appointed the border czar. Now, I know everybody's trying to erase the tape that she was the border czar, but she was. And they're not going to be able to erase that tape where I think it was Lester Holt interviewing her, said, well, have you been to the border? And she says, well, I'm in Guatemala. And he says, well, have you been to the border? Well, no, and I haven't been to Europe either. Like, what the hell does that have to do with it? And she eventually I think she went to El Paso, which didn't really have a problem, avoided all the hot spots, and literally did nothing. The guy whose face was at the border of the administration wasn't hers. It was Mayorkas, and he just did a horrific job at it. So she, on the key issue that she was responsible for, she was basically a no-show. And I think that's going to be a problem for them. So, sure, I think they're going to talk about threat to democracy. I think that's going to happen, and we'll see if it takes on traction. But here's the Richard. Here's the $64,000 question. You're going to see polling out through the weekend coming up into next week. What if these poll numbers don't shrink? What if it stays fairly consistent? Because, as you said earlier, Trump's base isn't going anywhere. Now, she may pick up some disgruntled Democrats who weren't going to vote for Biden, but they will vote for her. But that might tighten it up a little bit. But, how does it play out? We're 100 days out. Obviously, external events, Richard, could happen. But what's it going to take? If you're in the Democrat shoes, is it a vice presidential pick? People are talking Mark Kelly. What could sort of leapfrog the Democrats into Trump's pole position?
Well, and I think that we haven't talked about yet how one, they have the manufactured poll, I think, out already showing her jumping. I think we'll see more of that to try to give people encouragement on that side. They were bragging about getting $81 million the first 24 hours that she was the announced candidate. Well, that was from Act Blue, and I think that money was sitting committed, waiting for a move. And so it wasn't like it was a groundswell of everyday people sending checks into the Democrat Party. So they're trying to manufacture this picture right now to get her the nomination and get her over the finish line. And to me, again, I think they have very little positive to say. It's going to be a negative attack on Trump and then hitting their core issues with the unions and pro-abortion crowd as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right about that. Who do you think she picks for VP? Is it Mark Kelly or is it one of the other governors?
Well, I think what's interesting about that is there was speculation before that President Obama wanted Mark Kelly to be the nominee, and that Biden coming out and endorsing Harris caused a problem and an additional rift with Obama, which is interesting. And so it could be that they bring his name out, and then if she doesn't go forward as well as they want, they could end up swapping her for him before the nomination.
Richard Battle, so much palace intrigue coming from you, my friend. Listen, Richard, thanks for joining us today. It's always a pleasure having you on. Folks, one shameless plug. We have a new show coming Monday, 6 o'clock. We'll run Monday through Friday, Election Edge. Put it on your calendar. Election Edge with great guests. Yours truly will be hosting it Monday through Friday, 6 to 7. See you on Monday night.